Thank you, Tara, and thanks so much for inviting me back. So, U.S. economic outlook. I can give an update. The outlook is very murky. We'll talk a little bit about that. So let's go through some stuff. We're going to provide some data just on economic indicators. We'll talk a little bit about the bigger picture. I think broadly described as one word, just uncertainty. And then we'll turn to some data on the local economy. First, let's do some economic indicators. Let's start with what happened yesterday, right? Everybody aware of the GDP announcement that came out yesterday? Right, it was not good. It was not good, minus 0.3% growth. I will go through a couple of numbers that really express why that number is almost irrelevant and provides almost no information. You know, the traditional line is that, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth and we have a recession, right? First of all, never listen to that. It's never true. It's sometimes true, but that's not the definition of a recession. And no, this is probably not the first quarter of 2 that will give us a recession. Or is a recession coming? Maybe. But this isn't the start of it, right? This is because of the tariffs. Right, so a little bit on that, right? These are the 5 components of GDP, right? For those of you who took college economics, y equals c plus I plus g plus x minus m was kind of drilled into your head, right? And this is c plus I plus g plus x minus m and how each of those components contributed to GDP growth. And over there on the far side, you see imports, right? So imports contributed minus 5 percentage points to GDP growth. Right, so GDP growth might have been 5% instead of minus 0.3 had it not been for imports. That's not really true because that 3.6 that you see in terms of investment, right, that was largely buying to beat the tariffs, right? Getting cars in the country, getting computers into the country, right? So a ton of that just went into inventories. Right, on the right-hand side, you see inventories contributed 2.2 percentage points to GDP growth. Right, so that eliminated half of the 5% decline that we got from imports. And that number is usually, well, on average, it's about 0. Right, inventories grow, they decline, contribute about nothing. But when you buy into inventories, even if you put them in a warehouse, it goes into GDP. The other thing to look at here is the 1.3 in terms of non-residential investment, right? That too is a lot of companies buying computers, right? Buying to beat the tariffs, right? What that means is that going forward in the next few months, there's going to be less in the way of that kind of investment spending, right? So we may well get a second quarter of 2025 that is negative GDP growth, right? But both of those negative GDP growths might not be indicative of a recession. They might merely be indicative of people responding to the tariffs. Right? So don't worry a lot about the negative GDP growth. It doesn't matter for predicting the future. Government spending also didn't help, right? We haven't been sending weapons to Ukraine the way we were previously, so our defense spending is actually down. So that's providing a little bit of a drag on GDP. Right, in terms of consumption, right, this number for consumers buying goods, that's usually about 0.8%, right? It was just 0.1%, right? So predictably, consumers are saying, I don't know what's coming, so I think I'm not going to make this big expenditure. I may not take this big trip. I might not buy that new car, right? So consumers are pulling back. That too will contribute to negative GDP growth in the second quarter. In terms of jobs, tomorrow, the jobs report for April comes out, which is really, really unfortunate timing because I expect that jobs report to be very interesting, right? That's going to give us an indication of what happened in April. The May report was pretty good. I'm sorry, the March report was pretty good. It gave us about 228,000 jobs. Early indications are that the April report will be about 50,000. But I don't think those early indications fully encapsulate what's been going on with government employment, right? Numbers suggest that more than 200,000 federal government employees have been let go, right? So we'll probably get negative employment growth tomorrow. I'm not sure of that. I'm hopeful that it's not true, but I think that that's where we're headed. One thing that I like to point out these days where there's so much talk about the effect of immigrants, right? The blue line on there is job growth amongst the native-born population in the United States. The maroon line there is job growth amongst people who were not born in the United States but are here and working, right? And what this tells us is that almost all of the job creation, of the job growth that has happened since the onset of the pandemic, almost all of it has been among the non-native-born population. Right, so just an early indicator of a conversation we're going to have in a minute about how badly we need immigration. Okay, stock markets, not an indicator of the economy, although stock market declines often presage a downturn in the economy. And this downturn that we're experiencing is largely self-inflicted wound, where we're shooting ourselves in the foot with all of the tariff talk that's going on. You can see the big drop there on Liberation Day. Stock markets responded very, very negatively to the tariffs. So did every single economist that I know. Right? I don't know Peter Navarro, so I can say that. Let's talk just a little bit about inflation. Where are we? Right? In March, inflation, according to the Consumer Price Index, was about 2.4%. That's not 2%. So, how verklempt should we be that we're not at 2%? My view is not at all. Right? That 2% target, there's no body of economic literature that says 2% is the right number. There's a body of economic literature that says you want some small but positive rate of inflation. We have 2% because the head of the New Zealand central bank gave a talk and said, I think I'm going to target 2%. And all the heads of central banks all over the world kind of said, okay, we'll target 2%. Right? If he'd said we're targeting 2.4%, well, we'd all be thrilled today, standing as, okay, inflation is back down to where we want it. As an economist who understands these things, 2.4% is fine, and the trend is still down towards 2. That's all going to change, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Right? There are multiple measures of inflation. Even if you look at the personal consumption expenditure price index, this is the one that the Federal Reserve actually pays attention to. Right? That came out luckily yesterday, and that's at 2.3%. So we're a little bit above the 2% target. My view up until April 2nd was basically job done. Right? Inflation is tamed. It'll work its way back down to 2.0 in very little time, and then the Federal Reserve will start dropping interest rates in greater earnestness than they have been. That's all stalled out. Right? We don't expect interest rates to drop much for the foreseeable future. Price of eggs, right? They're still going up. All right, $6 for a carton. It's the bellwether that a lot of people use, but it's not really a very good one, right? I mean, the inflation of eggs, that's eggs and other products like that are part of what's keeping the inflation rate above 2, right? And what's happening there has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in the economy, right? It's avian flu, right? Nothing policy can do about that. Let's talk just a little bit about the Federal Reserve. Interest rates have been stuck at 4.5%. This is the federal funds rate. This is the interest rate that sort of drives all of the other interest rates in the economy. It goes up, the interest rate on your credit card, on mortgages, and car loans, and everything else goes up. Usually, that's changed a little bit lately. Especially mortgage rates, I'm not sure. Federal funds rates have been going down, mortgage rates have been going up a little bit. Housing markets are still kind of out of whack. What's the Fed going to do? I think they're going to sit tight at 4.5% for a while. Next Federal Open Market Committee meeting is next week. I expect no change. Because Powell and the rest, they don't know what's going to happen with the economy any more than I do. That's not true. They know better. But there's still big clouds that they have hanging over their heads. So takeaways, right? Is a recession on the horizon? Maybe. I've heard an awful lot of people update and increase their probability of a recession. Most are now above 50-50. Some prominent ones are about 2/3 likely to have a recession. I don't disagree with that. For a long time, I've been thinking that probably towards the end of this year, we're going to have a recession. And ever since January 20, I've been moving that date a little bit closer. Right? We may be heading right into it now. Second half of 2024, pretty strong GDP growth, right? The Economist in October of last year labeled our economy as the envy of the world's economies because we were recovering from COVID so much faster and so much better than almost anybody else. And again, the negative number in Q1, pretty much meaningless. It's just people importing a lot of stuff, sticking them in a warehouse because they don't want to pay a tariff on it. The problem is that uncertainty abounds, right? How far will we go with immigration? How many federal employees will be laid off? How high will tariffs remain? Will Fed Chair Powell be replaced prematurely? Right? Just one note on that. We had a Fed chairman put in place by Nixon, who was very political and did what Nixon wanted, and that turned out, that was in the early 70s, and by the late 70s, many in the room, I think, remember what happened in the late 70s. What were mortgage rates in the late 70s and early 80s? About 15, 16, 17%. Right? And that can be tied to political decisions made by the Fed chair. So I worry about our next Fed chair. I worry. Hopefully, he or she won't come in until next year, but I worry that they'll be political and that won't be good for the rest of us. Bigger picture, deportations, tariffs, cuts to spending and employment, threats to Chair Powell. I'm going to talk a little bit in depth about deportations and tariffs. Not so much about cuts to government spending and employment. That's self-evident. Government spends less. That's bad for the economy. Government lays off all of its federal workers. That's really, really bad for the economy because people who know and understand what's going on are now gone. And they won't just come back in 4 years, so that's troubling. Immigration. A little data on immigration. These are a little old from 2022. I think things have changed significantly since then, but estimates were that in 2022 there were about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. I think that number is now probably closer to 13.5 million, because this is well known and true. There were a lot of unauthorized border crossings during the Biden administration. There are about 48 million non-native born individuals in the United States. About half are citizens, and the other half split evenly between lawfully here and here in an undocumented way. More close to home down here, in 2019, and I could not find more recent data at the county level, but in 2019 there were about 83,000 unauthorized immigrants in the Monterey Bay region. That number is almost surely significantly larger now, but even then that was about 15% of the labor force. Right? And what that means is that if we do get mass deportations, right, that's going to be very, very bad for the local economy. We're getting increased deportations, but I hope it doesn't. Really happen the way that it's been said it's going to happen. Okay, immigration. Why do we care? Right? You heard a lot about immigration during the campaign. You're still hearing a lot about it. The conventional wisdom, the issues that were most often brought up were labor markets, government, and crime. Right? I'm going to talk a little bit about labor markets. Let me dispel the crime notion. It turns out that unauthorized immigrants are incarcerated at rates about half that of the native-born population. Right? People say, well, don't we just deport immigrants when they commit a crime? No, we don't. We incarcerate them, and at the end of their sentence, we deport them, which makes absolutely no sense. Right? Why would we pay to incarcerate them only to send them overseas? But that's what we do. So rates of incarceration are a pretty good indication. Right? Unauthorized or undocumented immigrants commit crimes at half the rate that native-born population does. Authorized immigrants, half again of the rate that unauthorized immigrants do. Right? So if in fact you deport unauthorized immigrants, crime rates will go up. There's a little bit of math that gets you there, but it's true. Crime rates will go up. Right? So let's not do that. Gross domestic product, right? Immigrants add to the labor force. And it turns out in the United States that by the year 2042, our native-born rate of population growth is going to turn negative. That means if we're going to grow the economy, if we're going to grow the population, we need immigration, period, full stop. That doesn't mean we need to open up our borders. What it means is that we need to rationalize our immigration system. We need to let a lot more people in an authorized way, right? That's actually the solution to the unauthorized immigrant problem. Call me crazy. All right? Thank you. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the jobs issue. The conventional wisdom on jobs that is, every unauthorized immigrant or low-skilled immigrant that comes in takes a job away from a low-skilled native-born American, right? One-for-one trade-off. Not true. More recent research, a lot of it which happens up at UC Davis, shows that low-skilled immigrants contribute positively to the economy, right? Even if they take jobs one-for-one, right? They live here, so they buy things. They buy cars, they buy gas, they buy food, they rent places to live. They contribute to the economy. So it turns out that if you bring in 100 low-skilled immigrants, they're going to create 109 jobs. So that's an additional 9 jobs for the native-born population. They create opportunities for low-skilled Americans, right? And opportunities, the best example that I've come up with, sort of a lawn mowing service, right? Suppose we don't have any immigrants, right? I go out, I say, I'm going to start a lawn mowing service. I'm going to mow lawns for people, and they'll pay me, right? Well, I'm going to be mowing lawns most of the time, but then if we open the doors to immigrants are going to come in, and they're going to be relatively low wage, so I'm going to hire some of them to mow the lawns, and now I am supervisor, and I'm engaging with the client. Right? That's a better job, pays more than mowing lawn does. So that's sort of the sense in which it creates opportunities. It also creates opportunities for more educated, higher skilled individuals. Right? Think about a couple, both of whom are lawyers. Right? They have kids. If childcare is expensive, one of those lawyers is not going to work to their full potential. They're going to take care of the kids, right? With immigrants, now they can hire somebody to take care of the kids. I've done this. It was a fantastic experience for my son, right? And that second parent can now work to their greatest extent as a lawyer, right? Working more hours as a lawyer is really, really valuable, right? To the lawyer, questionably for the economy, but that's another conversation, right? Low-skilled immigrants take jobs that Americans don't want, right? And they create jobs that Americans do. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Let me talk a little bit about mass deportations. One, immigrants work different jobs than do native-born workers. I have more slides on that, just not a lot of time. Two, immigrants contribute to the local economy. It turns out that if we were to deport the unauthorized immigrants, we would reduce GDP by about $1.7 trillion annually. Right? Think about it. That's a big number. Immigrants keep prices low. So many immigrants here involved in agriculture. Central Valley, half of the population that picks food, unauthorized immigrants. Take them out, food prices go up. They go up probably a lot. Deportations impact tax revenues. The average immigrant in the United States pays $1,300 more in taxes than they take out in services. Right? They are net plus to government coffers. Net plus to federal government coffers, state and local, not so much, because we, state and local, pay for education, right? And kids of immigrants, we educate them as we should. Unauthorized immigrants contribute $22.6 billion every year to Social Security, $5.7 billion to Medicare, right? These are programs that are running out of money, right? So let's deport people who are paying substantial sums into them. Doesn't make any sense. Deportations are expensive. Now, I'll caveat this. The way that we've been doing deportations costs about $13,000 each. The way that deportations are having now, it's much cheaper, right? The lack of due process, right? Due process is expensive. If we don't do that, it's cheaper. If we do it the old-fashioned way, estimates are that it's going to cost us about $315 billion to deport the unauthorized population. Right? So we're going to pay $315 billion to shoot ourselves economically in the foot. And they rob people of their dignity. I don't think I need to say more about that. Tariffs, right? Why are we imposing tariffs, right? Every day we get a different reason, right? We're imposing tariffs to generate government revenue, right? But we put tariffs of 125% on Chinese goods, right? If we don't import anything from China, do we pay tariffs on those goods? No, so there's a real Laffer curve effect. High tariffs mean low or zero revenue. Unfair treatment of our exports. Now, this is a fair argument, right? It's a fair argument, especially vis-a-vis China, right? They don't treat our imports as well as we treat their imports into the United States. So there's something to be done there. Close the trade deficit. Tariffs will not close a trade deficit. The trade deficit is because people all around the world like to invest in the United States. Right? So that's the other half of our international accounts. We run a massive surplus on investments, and that creates a deficit in goods and services. Right? Exchange rates make sure that that's true. Right? So tariffs are going to reduce imports, they're going to reduce exports, it won't do anything with the trade deficit. Bringing manufacturing back to the United States, actually dubious that this is going to happen. Right? Partly because you're raising the cost of investment funds in the United States. So at the same time that we're making it harder for imports to come into the country, we're making it less appealing to invest in the United States. What is a tariff? It's a tax on imports, right? Like the 8% sales tax. It differs from an 8% sales tax because if we import a car and pay 10% tariff on it, cars that are made in the United States, what happens to their prices? Their prices go up by 10% too. So we pay that 10% tax, but that 10% tax doesn't go to the government, it goes to the automobile manufacturer, which is precisely the point of the tariff, to get them to make more money, then they hire more people. Right? It turns out, though, that when we put tariffs on things like steel and aluminum, it costs us more jobs than it actually creates. Where are our tariffs today? Right? So this is our tariffs on China. Right? The blue is the U.S. import tariffs. Down here is our tariffs on everybody else. They're about 10.3%. China, 124%. As soon as we did the 124%, China was ready with 147% tariffs. Right? Trade flows are going to virtually grind to a halt between the United States and China, which has implications that are enormous, from dock workers to retail to Christmas, right? All of that. Economic effects of a tariff fails a cost-benefit analysis. Right? It's like throwing rocks in your port. It's not helpful. A tariff on one good can harm other industries. Right? We put a tariff on steel. What other industries in the United States use steel? All of them. Right? So their costs of production go up. They produce less. Estimates are that during Trump 1 tariffs 4, 5, 6 years ago, right, for every job that was created by tariffs, 8 jobs were destroyed. Tariff on one country just causes displacement to another, right? We put big tariffs on China, imports from Vietnam went up, right? And President Trump learned the lesson, put tariffs on everybody. Tariffs are not an effective tool to reduce the trade deficit. I talked about this. They're not a good way to raise government revenue because they are enormously distortionary. They cause people to change efficient decisions. It's a bad idea. Retaliation from other countries, 147% from China. Corruption, right? Tariffs can be selectively imposed. There's data that from President Trump's first set of tariffs, right, there were exclusions given to producers that gave to Republican campaigns. That's what the data showed. All right, likely economic effects, we're going to see reduced imports, higher prices for imports, reduced exports, unchanged trade balance, less investment in the United States, less manufacturing activity. New report out by the Peterson Institute for International Economics just yesterday, or I guess the day before, showing that in fact manufacturing employment and activity will go down. Right? Lower incomes throughout the economy are almost a given as an effect from the tariffs. In sum, inflation is close to the Fed's 2% target. It's plenty close for me, although that's going to change, right? Inflation will go up. Tariffs are inflationary. Deportations are inflationary. Current immigration and trade policies are going to exacerbate inflation. Immigration, deportations, it's tax the economy, and they're expensive. Tariffs are a tax, right? So much for no new taxes. They're massive tax. They're going to raise prices. They're going to cost jobs. Our biggest problem is uncertainty, right? For the economy writ large, nobody knows how to plan into uncertainty, right? Is it going to be a good investment environment? Is it going to be bad? So a lot of companies will draw back. They'll do necessary investments, but ones that they're not sure about, they're not going to make. Hardly anybody spends into uncertainty, right? People instead stop spending. Other countries are going to look elsewhere if the U.S. is volatile. Tourists already have. March 2025 numbers are down over 10% from March of 2024. Tourism numbers, right? So tourists are stopping again. Students are probably going to stop coming. And foreign students coming into the United States, it's a real economic boon. It helps universities a lot. Why? Because those students pay full freight. right? Outlook is not good. Inflation is inevitable. I think job losses. I'm not necessarily predicting a recession, though I believe one is coming, so maybe I should so I can get credit for it. I will be surprised if Q2 doesn't come in negative. I will be surprised if we get much job growth throughout Q2 going into Q3, but it all depends. Right? We could wake up tomorrow morning and all the tariffs get lifted and the deportation activity stops. The firing of federal employees stops. That could all stop tomorrow. I don't think it's going to, right? But there's so much uncertainty. It's very, very hard to predict what the future is bringing. Are we headed for a recession? Uncertain, right? Lots of forecasters are raising the probability of a recession. We may already be in one, but probably not. A slowdown in economic growth, I think, is pretty much inevitable. All right. Stagflation. Right? That's a term that we haven't used since the 70s. Right? But stagflation, highly likely. Slow economic growth and rising prices. Right? All of the economic activity, all economic policies that are coming out of government are inflationary and put a drain on economic growth. So we may see a revitalization of the term stagflation. I hope not, but it won't surprise me if we end up there. All right, let's talk a little bit about what's going on locally. Locally, these are GDP changes from 2019 to 2023. The blue bars in all of these graphs are for the MBEP region, the Monterey Bay Area region. The maroon bars are California. The green bars are the United States, right? So with respect to GDP changes, manufacturing is alive and well and growing in the Monterey Bay Area, and that's terrific. Also really great, leisure and hospitality been growing faster than in the rest of the country. And in terms of employment, right, total employment, if you look on the right-hand side, that's non-farm employment in the Monterey Bay Area, the 3 counties, right? And right at the very end there, over the course of the last 6 months, we've seen a real uptick in employment. As far as I can tell, that's primarily manufacturing, right, which is terrific. And it turns out that the manufacturing value added in this region is really good. Right, so the ratio of GDP to employment in the Monterey Bay Area is very high relative to the rest of the state, relative to the nation as a whole. Farm employment, that's the green down there, also a little bit of tick up towards the end of 2024 and going into 2025. Employment shares, right? Where is the employment in the Monterey Bay Area? A quarter of all of the employment is in agriculture. Right. Also, leisure and hospitality have a disproportionate share of employment. Other than that, the shares of employment around the region a little bit lower than they are in the state and nation as a whole. In terms of employment growth, I see people taking pictures. These slides are up on the National Economic Education Delegation website, and I will send a link to Jessica, who I'm hopeful will send that link out to all of the rest of you. And especially because at the end of this presentation, there are about 30 other slides that just provide some background on the economy, but I clearly don't have time to present all of them. In terms of employment growth, manufacturing, obviously, information sector, right? Technology sector employment is growth. Again, very high value added jobs, so that's a really good thing. Here you can see for Monterey Bay, I don't have a pointer, but the solid blue line in all of these graphs is for the local county, Monterey Bay. You can see that massive uptick towards the end. And that's because of it's facilitated by a massive increase in the labor force. And I was trying to do my homework, but I can't exactly figure out why that happened. All I know is that it's a really good thing. Right? So good things are happening in Monterey County. San Benito County recovered pretty quickly from the pandemic, but employment growth has been pretty flat over the course of the last couple of years. Santa Cruz County, get another uptick. I'm guessing that this is, again, more manufacturing coming into the region, which is terrific. Okay. DOT's forecast for employment, pretty positive outlook. Employment expected to continue to grow. Again, all of these, any forecasts that I put up are so very dependent on what happens over the course of the next 6 months to a year. That I almost hesitate putting them up there, but it's the best that we've got. and Department of Finance population forecasts. Population in the region is expected to grow. That's a very good thing. Population change. So I apologize, these are the same graphs that I put up last year because the data to up them probably come out next week. I would really be interested in seeing what happened to population. These are from January of 2024. I want to know what January 2025 numbers are really, really badly, right? Because population growth must have increased significantly, and that is probably a significant source of the labor force growth. So population, and these are also out of date. Again, data probably next week. I'll try to put those in the slides that I sent to Jessica when the data come out, and then you can see, right, we see out-migration from the region. I fully expect it to be in-migration in the region in 2025, okay? Population change on the left-hand side there, that's by age group, the population change. The maroon bars are increases in population, the blue are decreases. And increase in population is primarily among those aged 65 and above. That's through 2023. Again, I desperately want to know through 2025. And the graph on the right, that's the expectations through 2030, right? The aging of the population is expected to increase for the foreseeable future. Relative to the Bay Area, right, I'll go back and forth. That's Monterey Bay, that's the Bay Area, right? Pretty similar changes, although the Bay Area is expecting more growth in the sort of 25-year-old category. Poverty, this distresses me. Right? This is primarily Monterey County, but both overall and child poverty rates ticked up in 2022 and 2023 to the point where both of those poverty rates are higher now than they are in either the state or the nation. Working from home, I have long maintained that working from home is going to go back to something comparable to what it was before the pandemic because it was there for a reason and those fundamental reasons haven't changed. Right? In the Monterey Bay area, the percentage of those working from home is about halfway back from its peak. It's about halfway back to where it was before the pandemic. I'll be surprised if that doesn't continue. In terms of home prices, there's Santa Cruz County, there's Monterey and San Benito counties in California, and there's the United States. Right? So home prices have pretty much gone back to their long-term trend after the pandemic bump. In Santa Cruz County, home prices appear to be coming down a little bit. This is data through March. So, overall for the Monterey Bay area, home prices have returned to trend growth. Aging population going to require some in-migration, which we might have been getting over the course of the last year. I'm hopeful that we have. Employment recovery is picking up its pace. Lots and lots of manufacturing in particular growth and tech growth in the region is doing great things. Poverty rates, deeply concerning to me, and deportations will likely strain the local economy. Again, back in 2019, unauthorized immigrants were about 15% of the labor force, right? I expect that they're a higher percent of the labor force now, and even if you take a big chunk of those folks and deport them, that's going to be a big hit to the local economy. So hopefully that just won't happen. That's what I have. Here's information about how to contact me. I love these conversations. So if you have more questions after today, please feel free to send me an email. Be delighted to continue the conversation.